Good afternoon. Today we're going to be doing something really fun, and I'm going to teach you how to make your own pattern for a baked dish cover. I made one and posted a picture of it on the Facebook groups, and everybody was excited and decided that they wanted to have a tutorial on how to make one of these. So this is an Anchor Hocking dish. It is the 11-cup rectangular dish, and I made a cover for it, and all I did was use jelly roll leftovers. You know, sometimes you won't use a whole jelly roll, and I just used jelly roll leftovers. And for the top, I had an orphan embroidered quilt block. I had 3 of them. I don't know why I made 3. You need 4 to make a quilt block, and I just made 3 and quit on it and moved on to something else. So I had 3 orphan quilt blocks, and I'm going to show you how to make this one, and we'll make just one. And I made the top cover. This doesn't have any handles, but I made the top cover so that it's a pot holder and has a little pot holder handle here. And there's my dish, my covered dish. And this is my little carrier that the dish fits in. It's very fun, very easy. And after I show you how to take these measurements, you're going to be able to make one of these for every casserole dish size that you have. It doesn't have handles, but you could put handles, I guess, if you wanted to. You can always wrap something around. But anyway, what I suggest here is to, when you get where you're going, take the pot holder top off, put it down, set the carrier on the pot holder, on whatever surface that you're on. So to make this, you're going to need, first of all, you're going to need a dish. And as I told you before, this is Anchor Hocking, 11 cup, it says 2.6 liters. And it has the lid, there's 2 kinds of these. One kind, the lid kind of pops over and has a funny looking little handle here. So you don't want that one if you want your carrier cover to fit nice and snug. You'll have to have this one. And this one is called a Snug Fit Lid. So this is what it looks like. And you'll need one of those. You'll need a jelly roll, or I don't know, you could probably get away with cutting your own if you have plenty of scraps. You'll need several 2.5-inch wide strips, or you could use you know, something like this. These are just like a jelly roll, except they're in a flat package. You'll need at least a yard of some sort of complementary fabric that you can use for your lining. So at least a yard, and that's for this size. This jelly roll, let's see, this jelly roll is a Walk in the Park by Ro Gregg for Paintbrush Studios. 100% cotton. Yep, you'll probably get this at any quilt shop, or you can maybe order it online. So jelly roll, the glass dish, a yard at least of lining fabric, and then you'll need some machine embroidery supplies, some stabilizer, and a design. And so we can talk about that kind of as we do the embroidery. Then you're going to need some insul bright. This is insul bright, an insulated batting, so you'll need that for the pot holder. And you'll need some fusible foam. That's what this is. It has a glue on one side, and it's like soft and stable, except it's called flex foam, and you will use this in the carrier, the interior of the carrier. So, okay, so let's get started with. So let's start with the bottom base part of our little casserole dish cover. And that way when we get to the lid, the pot holder lid, we'll do our embroidery and everything all at once on that. And I forgot to mention, in the materials, you're going to need a piece of fusible fleece. This is like Thermolam plus fusible. So it'll have glue, you know, the fusible on one side and the fleece on the other side. So we need that for the lining. And write this down. For this size of casserole dish, we need a base, the lining, and the fleece all cut larger than 16.5 by 14.5. Cut it larger, and then we're gonna cut it down after we get all of our piecing done and our fusing done. So I can see here that, let's see, let me cut my foam first. That'll make it a little easier. So I'm going to straighten the edge on my foam. I got kind of a long piece here that's not really, well, it might be good for something someday. They'll save it, but it's not going to work for this project, so I'll put it out of the way for now. And so let's see here. I'm going to have my 16 inches go this way because that's the most economical use of my foam. So let's just come down. Why don't we come down about, let's see, let me turn it this way so I can read my ruler. And I need 14.5 inches this way, but I'm going to cut it at 16 because that way then I've got enough room after it gets, because this is going to get quilted, because when we put our 2.5 inch strips on this, we're going to have, you know, it's going to draw it up a little bit. So I'll cut it this size, and I'll go all the way across. And I'll have a little bit of waste, but not very much. Okay, here we go. All right. So now I might mark my 16.5 by 14.5 on here. Let's see. I'm going to have to do something here because 16.5 is a lot. And I've got a lot of overhang here, 16, 17. Let's do it at 18 inches. Let's come across here at 18. That way we're 2 inches bigger on both measurements. So I'll cut this guy right here. And now, whoops, now I've got everything pretty much ready to go here. There we go. Okay, so this is going to be the base that I'm going to sew all my 2.5 inch strips to. So I need a line from point to point. So I've got a straight line that I can start on. And I'm just using a friction pin that will go away with my iron when I press this. That might be fusible, I'll see. Okay, so we've got a place to start. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take our jelly roll and just go one strip at a time. And we're going to lay our strips down. And I might just go right down the middle of my mark. That way I don't have too... Let me see how close I can get here. We don't want to waste any of this. Okay, very good. Okay, I'll stick a couple pins in this because, you know, when you're walking just a little ways and, you know, getting to your sewing machine. Let me see where I'm at up here. There we go. And I'm not stretching this jelly roll strip, but I am making sure it's laying flat. I don't want to have any wobbles in it because if it does, then it'll give us trouble with little tucks and stuff when we do our next strip. Okay, so that one's done. We'll get down to the next one that I think will be pretty on this. Alright, here we go. Here's another one. So now we're going to, and you can base that on if you want to, but it'll be alright if you don't. So this is right sides together. We're going along here, right sides together. And we're going to stitch at 1/4 of an inch down this side. And that will be our first 2 pieces of fabric on our casserole cover. The bottom part. I've got a pin here. And jelly rolls come kind of pinked along the edges. So don't worry about that. It isn't like this has to have precision. You have to be fairly straight, but you don't have to, this doesn't have to be perfect at all. I'm going to cut off my extra here. And then now we're ready to go and stitch down through here. And we're going to stitch right on and through the foam, through 2 layers of fabric and the foam. So we're going to use like a, I don't know, we might use a 7511, we might use an 80 needle. We'll see what we need when we get there, and make sure we've got good thread and a full bobbin. Always want to have a full bobbin when you start a project like this. And so then we'll be back, we'll get over to the machine and stitch this one down and come back and head for the next one. So I did go ahead and put an 80-12 needle in my machine, and I'm just going to start just a little off the edge of the foam, and I hope you can see this. Let me see if I can get you in any closer. Maybe I can. Alrighty, there's a little better view. I don't think I can get you any closer. There we go, a little bit closer, I guess we can. Okay, so, and I'm just using a 2.5 stitch length, and I'm using my 37D foot, which you can see back behind here. I've got my dual feed engaged. Anytime you use a D foot, you always use your dual feed. And I held my threads a little bit over here to the side so I don't have a thread nest. And I'm just going to buzz down across here. And this is the way that we are going to stitch every single strip on this piece of foam. And after we stitch each strip, we'll just kind of finger press it to the side. And I did pin mine down, but if you're comfortable without doing that, you can probably get away with it. And another thing you can do, if you would like, is to press your strips with a little bit of best press before you get started quilting on your piece of foam. So I'm just about to the end, and I'm not going to use my thread cutter. I don't want to use my thread cutter with this. Take my pins out. It's not a good idea to sew over pins. And straighten out my corner here and away off the end. I'm just going to sew just off the end of the foam. And I'm not going to backstitch either. I'll just trim my threads. And trim the ones at the beginning. I have kind of a neutral colored thread in my bobbin and a just a kind of a mauve colored Orifil thread in my top of my machine, and both of them are 50 weight thread. So there is my first seam down across my foam. Everything looks great. So I'm just going to tack this a little bit and just hold it with some pins and go get my next strip to put on here. So if you're really well organized and you've got a table next to your sewing machine, you wouldn't have to get up, but my workstation is quite a ways away, about 10 feet, and so I'm going to have to get up and go back over to my workstation to do my next strip. So we'll do that, and then also 1 or 2 more strips, and then that'll be enough to kind of show you how to do it, and then you can finish up everything on your base, and then we'll move on from there. Okay, so I pressed, and my foam is fusible on this side, so these 2 first strips are going to stay put really well. So now it's time to put on the next 2 rows, and something you have to kind of watch for is down here at the ends. You want to make sure you've got plenty of fabric. If you come back here and sew it on, you might not make it. So make sure you kind of overshoot the end by a ways. And so then we'll go ahead and we'll pin this on. And I think I can pin 1 more on. And when it just takes a few minutes to put all the strips on this size of a little mat, especially when you're doing them 2 at a time. Once you get the first 2 on, you can move on to going a little bit faster and doing 2 at a time. Okay, there you go. I'm going to cut off my excess like I did before. Not too short though. Make sure I've got enough. And here. And we'll go sew these 2 on and flip them and press them, and then we'll finish out the rest. I've kind of got some more fabrics laid out here that I think I'm going to use as I go along. So, okay, here we go, back over to the sewing machine. Okay, same as before, holding my threads to the side. Actually, This one's gonna give me grief, so I'll pull it around. It's kind of wrapped around my presser foot. There we go. Or not. There we go. Okay. Here we go. Kind of starting off the foam like I did before and holding my threads. Take out my pins. Don't want to worry about those. Let's see here. I don't know if I can get you in. I'll try to get you in a little more. Okay, can you see? Let me see here. There we go, maybe. There we go. Now, okay. We'll go down, get these two on, and then off camera, I'll sew the rest. And we'll be back then after that and move on to the next step. Okay, I'm off the foam, trim my threads. I'm going to turn around and come right back up this other side. Whenever you're sewing strips like this, if you go down one side, up the other, and just keep your directions going back and forth, you won't get a wobble. It's pretty easy to get things off track and get a bad wobble and stuff when you're sewing strips together, even if you're using a background or a back fabric like this foam. I'm just going along the edge of my presser foot, so I know I'm getting a 1/4 inch seam. Okay, there we go. Clean up your threads as you go. You don't have a lot of thread tails hanging off, getting messy work. Okay, so we'll open these two out and we'll press them over at the machine. See how fast this goes? So just, what, 2, 3 more or so on each side, and so that'll mean like 2 or so more trips to the machine to stitch, and this base will be done, and we'll start on the lining. So get your stuff cut out and catch up, and when I come back we'll cut the corners for our the corners to come up on our casserole cover. So since my foam is fuseable, I can just press my strips down and fuse them to the foam. There we go. Got it all all my piecing done. And since I use fusible foam, all my strips just are laying so nice and pretty. When you do this, you want to make sure that you're stitching to the side of the foam that has the glue on it. So now, and here's what our backside looks like. So now we're ready to cut this down to 16.5 by 14.5. And if you have a casserole dish at home that is a different size, you can set your dish on, cut a larger piece of foam, plenty big, and set your casserole dish on that foam, and you'll measure from the bottom of the dish. In some cases you can even just use the lid, and you'll just measure out 3 inches. You can even measure out 4 inches because you can trim the top after you get it even sewn together. And you'll measure out 3 or 4 inches, whatever your preference is, from each side. And most casserole dishes all have about the same height. And what I did was measured up the side of this dish, and then I did a little calculating, and I discovered that a 3-inch square cut out of all 4 corners was perfect to box this in, so that that we have a square little container when we're done. So let's go ahead and get this down to size. So I need 16.5. So we're going to have to go the lengthwise, aren't we? So 16.5. And I'm just going to, since this was pretty square when I started, I'm just going to mark 16.5 inches off the length of it. And I'll do it up here too, just in case things shifted a little bit when I was stitching the jelly roll strips to this. And now I'll just trim it. And we might have some waste with the fabric, but it won't be much. Okay, there's that. And now we need, let's trim off the other end. Make sure I'm at 16.5. Yep. At 16.5. So now I need 14.5. So let's do 14.5. And I'll make a mark here and a mark here at 14.5. And we'll trim the other side. So let me check this. Yep, 16.5, right on there. Okay. So we get our 14.5, and it's not absolutely imperative that these measurements are perfect. You want to be pretty close, but you know, we're gonna have a little extra anyway, so that because we're gonna put a lining in this. So we're going to put a binding around the top. And if you want to, you know, you can sew your binding the same time you do this. I mean, you know, you can sew it together and turn it right side out. But I wanted mine to be kind of, I wanted to have a binding. I kind of like bindings. Okay, so now here's my 3-inch I need to get my 3 inches out of the corners. So I'm going to mark them. So I'm going to cut 3 inches. And all our seam allowances, except for when we're putting on the binding, the seam allowances on this project are 3/8 inch. So when I sew these darts to box this up, I'm going to sew 3/8 inch from the edge of the dart. I'll show you what I mean when we get there. Okay, there we go. All right. So now we're going to cut out our corners. And save these. You can use them for something. We'll figure something out to do with them. Alright, one more, and we've got our corners trimmed. There we go. Okay, so now what we're going to want to do is to make this into a box. So right sides together, we're going to bring these up till they meet the corners, and we want them to be pretty even. So we'll box them up here, a couple clips at each corner. This whole project is so much fun, and I think you could do a couple of them in an afternoon. It would depend on what embroidery design. If you had an embroidery design that took a lot of time, that would add to it. But you could even do, if you don't have an embroidery machine or the module to your Bernina, you can just do a log cabin for the top, piece that together, be just fine. Alright, there is our box, and now along here we're going to do a 3/8 inch seam here. We're going to just sew at 3/8 inch seam allowance right from top to bottom. Okay, I've sewn all my corners. Got kind of looking like a little box now. So I'm going to turn it right side out. Oh, it's so pretty. I love these colors. And kind of push out the corners at the bottom there. Give it a little encouragement here to bend where I want it to. Just a little pushing with my fingers here. Now let's see. Look, oh, perfect. This is just perfect. We're up a little bit, and so I've got enough room for my binding around here and for the pot holder to sit down in here just a little bit, and it fits really nice. But if you've made your own pattern for a different size casserole dish, and you did it the way I showed you with putting down, or I told you, putting down a large piece of the foam and shaping it up, measuring out 3 inches or 4 inches and shaping it up. If it's still a little too big, you can take a little bit deeper seam at all 4 corners, but go really slow at that. Do like 1/8 of an inch at a time. Because it won't take too much and it won't fit. It'll be pretty tight. This is really fitting perfectly. So, okay, let's do our lining next. So we're going to cut out a piece of lining that is also 16.5 by 14.5, and we're going to cut it bigger, just like we did this. And I'm going to fuse that to fuseable fleece, which I'm going to cut bigger, and then we'll cut it to size. So I'm going to do that next. This is the glue side of my fleece. This is my lining. So we'll press this on. I'm going to go my 16.5 inches this way, and I only allowed myself, I don't know, about 1/2 inch. Extra. So let's go across here. Here. I didn't leave myself enough. Next time I better do more. Shrink up. I guess I'll just straighten this edge and that'll have to do. I've got a straight edge down here, so. Okay. Here we go. Just straighten that. There we are. Okay, now we got to go 14.5 in this direction. Actually, that looks like 16.5, so I got to go 14.5 the other way. We're a little bit close. I think I better straighten an edge. I didn't expect this to shrink up 1/2 inch, but I guess it did. Because I measured 15 by 17 when I cut out my lining. Okay, I think we're going to do okay. Things will work out. They usually always do. Okay, let's just mark us a line here to cut on this end. Then we're going to cut out our 3-inch squares just like we did before. And we'll sew up our corners just like we did before. There we go. Okay, now we got 16.5 by 14.5, just barely. So let's cut out, let's mark out our 3-inch corners. And even though this is the same measurement and it's going to be a lining, we're not going to make it any smaller because we want this to fit pretty snugly around the casserole dish. And it'll be the same. It'll be a 3/8 inch seam allowance for boxing the corners. And we'll be all set. And we'll have our base just about done. The bottom part of our carrier, just nothing left to do but put on the binding. Then we can start on the top. I think you could probably get 2 or 3 of these out of one jelly roll, but I know you could get 2 for sure. Maybe not 3. Okay, there we go. Okay, now we're going to do just what we did before. We're going to fold these up to meet. And where'd all my clips go? There we go. And we'll sew this at a 3/8 inch seam allowance just like before. And this is going to sit right snugly down in our outer cover that we made. And we're going to bind around the top. That way we've got a little splash of color around the top. But, you know, like I said before, if you want to, you can certainly sew this and leave an opening. You know, you'll sew it all the way around and leave an opening. And you can turn it. But I'm going to put a binding. Okay, I'm going to sew these corners. I sewed the 4 corners of my lining, and I tested it in here, and it was too big. So remember earlier I said that if you needed to, you could adjust the size of your little casserole carrier by taking in just a little bit more on all 4 corners, but to go really slow and carefully and just do 1/8 inch at a time. So that's what I did on my lining. I took in, let's see if I can get it in the camera there. You can see my first line of stitching, and then I did a second line 1/8 inch in, and I did it on all 4 corners so that it's just that much smaller. And now it fits in here really, really well. And I still might go ahead and trim away a lot of this excess in these seams because they're a little bit bulky. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this seam toward the end and this seam on my cover toward the side, the long side, and nest them. And it won't hurt if your lining comes out a little bit past the edge of your cover. That's okay. That's actually about the thickness of the foam that we put in here. So we'll trim that away and make that edge nice and even. And on both of the ends, I'll do the same thing. I'm just tucking my dart into, well, both darts actually. I'm tucking them sort of into each other. And all I really want to do here is, this is just sort of a check, a pin check, to make sure that this is exactly the size that I want it to be and that it fits the way I want it to fit. Look, nice and smooth, fits in there just perfectly. And before I had a wrinkle in here, so taking that another 1/8 inch at all 4 of my corners, it just made it perfect. And you can see there's not any trouble fitting around the edges at all. So what I'm going to do next then, now that I know this fits good, is I'm going to take this bulk out. I'm going to trim these seams, and then I'll put the lining back in and clip it and trim it. And then I'll baste around the top. And then I've got this fabric picked out for my binding. So I'm going to make a binding. And since we're using a jelly roll, and we have 2.5 inch strips, that's just the perfect size that we need for our binding. So there we go. Now let's check. Do we need to? I don't think we need to trim these. These are pretty good. So let's set this down in here. And this time we're going to settle it in here for real, and it's going to stay. And I'm going to clip it. And my clips are going to go over this top because of the lining, because that's not going to line up. So, but that's all right. That's always good that you have a little. I'd rather have to trim some off than worry that I cut it too short. So, and you know, when you do things like that, sometimes you do kind of wing it. So I'll get this last corner clipped. This fits in here a lot better after I trimmed off the bulk. And I got these little seams nested at all 4 corners. So, okay, what I'm going to do now is at like 1/8 of an inch, I'm going to go along and baste. I'll clip it better before I go to the machine. And then I'll baste at 1/8 of an inch right along here. And then I'll trim off my extra lining that's sticking up. And start putting on my binding. So I'll be back shortly and we'll be working on that. I wanted you to see, I want to use my free arm for this. You could turn this, if you have a flatbed machine, you could turn this way out and get this around, but you need to be on the side that is the right side out of your cover so that you can see how much of your lining is sticking out. So I left my stiletto over at my workstation, but and I'm just doing this at 1/8 of an inch because my binding seam allowance is going to be 1/4 of an inch. So this will be caught inside the seam allowance. And I'm just coming up to a corner here and I'm just sort of flattening it and whizzing by. And I didn't use all clips. I have a clip here, but I pinned most of it because the clips, I don't have any long clips and mine were just about too short for this excess lining that's hanging over. So, and I'm just using a 2.5 stitch length and just 1/8 of an inch, and we're just basting this. This is not really, you know, if you think you can get away with pinning and trimming, you can certainly do that, but you know, basting is a really good thing in a lot of different sewing projects. Things can certainly shift, and basting is just going to be one of your best friends. And be sure and take all your pins out. Alright, I'm at a crossroads of my life here. And I made it. And I think I've got an idea of what we can do with our scraps that we cut out of the corners. So if the video doesn't get to be too horribly long, I'll share that with you. Okay, so I'm going to finish sewing the rest of the way around this, and then I'll trim this excess, and we'll be ready to do our binding. Okay, basting is all done, so I'm going to just sort of have a look, and I'm going to trim off all my extra lining that's sticking up, which, as I mentioned earlier, is about the thickness of the foam that's that we have used in our outer part of this casserole cover. So we'll just trim it off nice and even. And before I did that, I made sure that everything still fit and looked nice down inside. There we go. Now everything just looks beautiful in here. Okay, so now we're going to put our binding on. And I pressed this, and I picked out kind of a bright color for around the binding. So I kind of like things to sort of pop up around the top of these. And I just pressed this with a little bit of Best Press, And as you can see, I have not pressed it in half. It's not a good idea to press a binding in half, especially if it's not on the bias. And this is with the fabric, so it has a little stretch, you know, a little stretch, but not like it would if it were bias. So, and I want to sew from the front and fold it toward the back, and then I'll hand stitch it down. So I am going to fold it, but I'm not going to press it in half. And I want to start at, oh, kind of an inconspicuous place. So I'll start here, oh, about the middle of one of the ends. These are the sides. These are the sides. Let me see. Maybe I can scooch you out a little more, and you can see a little better what I'm doing. Okay, these are the sides, these are the ends, and I'm going to start about midway on an end. And I'm going to leave myself some extra, but all I'm doing is clipping, so, you know, if I needed to, I could certainly take the clips out and readjust. And when you're putting a binding on, you want to stretch it just a little bit. That's why it's important that you always have some stretch in the fabric that you're using for your binding. And of course, bias binding would be fantastically stretchy. I'm just trying to get this down. I don't want that to be in the way when I fold after I stitch and I get my fabric folded. So I am just gently pulling a little tiny bit on my binding. So it's just fitting up there nice and pretty. It's not too tight and it's not absolutely loose. And the reason that I did not press a fold in it is because it has to turn a corner like this. When we pull this over to the back side, it has to turn a corner. So this is not going to be, this edge here is not going to be exactly where a fold would be if we were to press this and fold it in half and press it. So let's say I have it stitched on here and I'm rolling it over and folding it to the inside. This fold on this side is nowhere near the center. It's just like this. If you take a book, this is just a post-it notepad, but look how how much wider the place where the ends of the pages are. The more I fold it, the more they move. So that's the way it is with binding. So I don't ever press a fold in my binding. And on quilts, I do press the binding, but after I have it stitched to my quilt. That way I get a nice crisp binding, but it's not crooked. And you'll find that if you press your binding first and then try to put it on, you'll get these little waves or ripples sort of in your binding. So try to practice not pressing a fold into your binding until after you have your binding completely attached. Okay, so now I'm around to the beginning, and now we have to make a decision about how we want to join this binding. So here we are, and I've got plenty of room here. I could just clip it and lay it in one end inside the other, fold it back and do it that way. That would be great. Or I can join it so that it has a straight line seam, or we can join it on the diagonal, which is what I think I'll do. So I'm going to come up here and clip it at about the halfway point, not quite, but about halfway. And then I'm going to cut this off. And I'm going to try to cut it just as square as I can. And now I need 2 inches of this piece here, or 2.5, because this is 2.5 inches. So let me see here. Let me square up the end. I need 2.5 inches. So it's 2.5 inches lengthwise. So it's going to be a 2.5 inch square because my binding is 2.5 inches. Okay. So now I'm going to lay this piece down and lay this piece on here like this. So I've laid this on, and I've laid this piece of binding over the top here, and I've laid this piece on top so I could see where to cut, and I've cut it off right here. I cut the excess off right here. So now we're going to take this to the machine and we're going to sew this on the diagonal, and it's going to fit absolutely perfectly when we are done. So I'm going to just sort of clip it here before I get over there to the machine, and we're going to sew from this corner here to the bottom corner over here, and when we turn it right side out it'll lay in there and fit perfectly. I wish I was in camera all the time, I'm sorry. Okay, I'm going to go sew this and I'll be right back. Alright, so I've just kind of pushed my carrier cover back out of the way, and I have the top line, the end piece of one piece of binding, the end, and the top line of the piece I want to join of the binding together. And I'm just very gently kind of positioning it where the corner of that underneath piece is. You could sew it the other way if you wanted to so you could see it. We can turn it over and do it this way too. Either way works. So we've got this all lined up, and we are going to stitch from this corner. Actually, I've got to sew it the other way. I better do it the way I'm used to so I can see what I'm doing. Alright, now then, that's a little better for me. So I'm going to start right here where the top of this, oh, I don't even have a pin here. So I can see where the top is, so I'm just going to start there, and I'm going to drop my needle down so that it holds it, and then I'm going to kind of loosen up and straighten up so that I've got a really nice piece of fabric here to sew on. I need to squish my cover in a little more. There we go. Okay, this is nice and relaxed now. And I'm looking at my center line down here, and I'm going to run the point right up that center line and join these two pieces of binding. And and they will fit absolutely perfectly when we're done. So I'll trim this excess off, but let's test it. You always want to test everything before you trim it. And so there it is. It's going to fit just perfectly. There we go. So I'll trim the excess off and finish clipping the binding, and we'll sew the binding on. Okay, got my binding is all clipped on, looking good, and I am going to need to use my free arm for this again because I want the binding side up. So I'm going to take my slide-on table off and bring my little cover in. And I'm putting this binding on at 1/4 inch, and I'm going to make sure that my lining pieces are always nice and flat underneath here, and I'll be able to feel along with my fingers as I go. And I am going to lengthen my stitch length a little bit to 2.85. This is pretty thick stuff here. I've got foam and fleece and I don't know, several layers of fabric and several seams. So I'm going to lengthen my stitch length just a little bit. So we're going along, and we're just going at 1/4 inch right along this edge. I don't know if I can bring you in anymore. I don't want it to blur. There we go. Let's try it. We'll see how we do. And you could do this without a free arm. You could certainly turn your, you know, like I mentioned before, you could turn your little carrier wrong side out and do it flat. And I like hand sewing. If you want to, once you get your binding rolled over to the back side, you know, if you want to put it on by machine, oh my goodness, it'll be just fine and beautiful. So you can certainly do that, but I'm a hand stitcher. I love my machine, but I love stitching by hand too, and just sitting and being quiet and collecting my thoughts. Right. Just about all the way around. So I'll finish this up, and then we'll turn it and clip it, and pretty quick we're going to get started on our potholder top. Okay, I've got the binding all sewn on, so now we get to turn it to the inside, and I kind of finger press mine up as I turn it. I give it a, you know, a sort of a tug and a roll and a push, and pull it all up. And now I'm going to roll it over, and you'll see that it's going to go way past any seams that are showing, and it's going to leave me a pretty little trim on the outside of my cover. So I'm just going to clip this, and then off camera I will hand stitch this down, because I love hand stitching and I love the feel of fabric. And the time I spend with it. So I'll do that. But you can certainly stitch it on machine if you want. There's plenty of turnover on, you know, of rollover on this binding that you could do a stitch in the ditch right here and you'll catch the back for sure. There's so much, there's plenty, so you know, and you could get kind of crazy with these things if you wanted to. You could certainly put a decorative stitch down in your lining. You would do that before you assemble and put your lining in. But after you fuse it to the fleece, might be kind of fun to use your circular decorative stitch attachment and do a circle in here, or you could, if you have an embroidery machine and you wanted to, you could do a circle and put your initials in here. Or the initials of the person you're gonna maybe give it to if it's a gift. There we go, just about around. Alrighty, so I will hand stitch this down and be back, and we will start on the potholder lid. That turned out really cute. Looks great. So here's my little cover all finished, and I set the dish in there, and you can see that it has to have a little lip around here, a little bit of a lip, so that our potholder can set right down in here and be nice and cozy and snug. So let's get started on our potholder. And so I saved out my scraps that I cut off when I did my the bottom to the cover, and so I'm going to use those up first. But I did save one scrap that is just about this long, and I think it'll be just right for the binding for the potholder. So I'm going to save that because it matches the binding here on my cover, but yours doesn't have to match. It'll be alright however you choose to do it. And I have picked out one dark piece for the center of my log cabin block. So this is a design from Sweet Pea, which if you want to do this design you'll have to buy it, but this is from Sweet Pea, and I'll put a link in the information with this video to this design where you can purchase it. But you can put any embroidery design in here. There could be something on your machine even that came with your machine that you might like to put in here. And so we are going to get started with the potholder top. We're not going to put any foam in this one, but we are going to put a piece of insul bright in it. So since I'm going to be doing this design that's on this top here, I already have my lights and darks for my log cabin design kind of sorted out, and I have my center square, and I'm going to go get set up at the machine and get my embroidery module ready to go, and we'll stitch this design out, and from there it'll be a quick step or two to be finished up. So I'm at the machine, and I'm doing my embroidery for my potholder top for my casserole carrier, and I have hooped up 2 pieces of tearaway stabilizer. So there's 2 pieces here, 1, 2, and then I've laid a piece of fleece down, and this is per the instructions. When you download this file, if you're using this file and you purchase it, when you download it you'll get a zip folder, and you'll have to open that, and in the zip folder there's a PDF that has all the step-by-step directions on how to stitch out the little block, and you stitch it out 4 times, and then you would put it together and it would be a quilt block. But for our purposes today, we're just going to stitch out 1, not 4. And so the first stitch sequence that it does is it's going to stitch out the line that's the size of the quilt quadrant. And I'm going to show you how to make this rectangular for our the top of our casserole cover when we get ready to make this into a pot holder. And then the second thing that it's going to stitch out is the very center square here that you can see. It has stitched that out. So that's just a placement line, or it's called sometimes a die line, where I can put down my center spot, my center piece of fabric for my little log cabin. So I've started, and then I stopped so I could start the camera. So now I'm going to finish out going around this little piece here. And you'll always keep your fingers back. You don't want to ever put your fingers in the way anywhere near the stitch field. If you're in the stitch field, you're in trouble, or you could be in big trouble. So the next thing it's going to ask me for is to lay a piece on here, and it's going to stitch it and flip it. And I'll show you here, up here on my machine. I don't know if I can. Might have to, let's see if I can pull you in a little closer. I don't know if you can, I don't think you can see that. But it's got a little line across here which tells me it's ready to sew the first strip to my center block. So I'll go get my first strip and be back, and we'll stitch that down. So when you get done stitching this seam that we just did, it wants to do a little tack down so that it'll hold that down. So you flip it and fold it and just sort of finger press it, and the next step is that the machine will tack it down, and there it is. And then the next step is to put this light strip on this side. So we'll do a light strip that'll come down this side. And these 2.5-inch strips are very, very oversized. So you can see how just this wide is all the wider our log cabin strips are going to be. But we'll just trim as we go along. Okay, so we're going to stitch this down. And this is what I would call an in the hoop project. I would definitely call this an in the hoop project. Okay, now we're gonna, oh, I gotta trim my thread, just a second. I'm gonna trim my thread. And then we're gonna fold again, flip and fold. And once again, the machine's gonna tack this down. Trim threads again. Constantly trimming threads, I think. Now we're ready for a dark piece. So I'm going to trim this a little bit. And we've got quite a bit of extra fabric here, so we don't really need all of it. So we'll just trim a little of that off of there. And it doesn't matter if we're not very neat, because it's all going to be underneath there. So now we want a dark fabric. So we'll get that down. I got to cut off a selvage here. There we go. And this one's going to go across, right sides down. It's going to go across this way. And I'm looking at the screen on my Bernina too that tells me, it's going to tell me what direction things are stitching and exactly where I'm at here. So we'll stitch this one down. And trim this big end off of here. Fold it back. Cut my thread first. Could use my thread cutter. Well, I have it turned off because I'm working on some bags and I don't want it to cut the thread in certain places. So I have it turned off actually. Alright, now we're going to top stitch this down, tack it down. Looking pretty good here. Very good. And now we're going to stitch along this other side, along the left-hand side. And this is just how it goes. So I'm going to trim, stitch, flip, top stitch. Trim, stitch, flip, top stitch. That's how this goes till we get this whole log cabin part done. So I'm going to finish that up and then I'll be back and we'll do the embroidery part. I think this is the last one before we start the embroidery. The very last log of our log cabin block here. Okay, it's gonna want to do some embroidery now, and this is all in the same color, so I'm gonna do it in this sort of pinky mauve-y color that I already have in the machine. And you could choose whatever color you like, and it's gonna go round and round now. This part of this embroidery is going to take several minutes to stitch out, so we will save a little video time and we'll come back when this is finished. So we're all done with our embroidery. Got the quarter block all done. So let me put this away. And I'm going to cut this tearaway away from here, but I'm not going to cut the fleece. I want to leave the fleece. And we're just going to leave the tearaway in there, because who would want to tear that out of there? I don't know who. Not this one. So, get rid of these. Get that all laid out. So now what we need is a lid. We gotta have a lid off of this. If I can get it off of here. I guess you don't have to worry about anything spilling. So I got my embroideries all done, and I cut away the stabilizer, but I left the fleece. So he's got the fleece, and I put the lid to the casserole dish on top of my embroidery here. And this has to be set kind of on point, so you can see it kind of on point, so that you can get this design to head and have your head down and have your log cabin block kind of showcased in there. So I have just sort of centered this, like right here. I've centered the lid. I used my ruler and kind of guesstimated the center right here to the point, and I've got like 4 inches to where it starts to turn, and here's 4 inches till it starts to turn, so I know I'm pretty close to center right here. And I'm just going to kind of come around the corners of my lid. The corners of the lid. But especially around the corners, so I can see where I'm at. And then I do have some measurements, and that's for this size. Okay. So there's my lid. And you can see, or well, my pot holder for the top of the casserole cover, and you can see that there's some places that there isn't any fabric. So we're going to have to take our I got to find my, here we go, find my jelly roll. So we're gonna fill this on out, and then we're gonna cut this out, and we're gonna use some measurements so this, I'll sew this on, and we're gonna cut our insul bride too. So it looks like I'll need 2 pieces, because here's just a little bit of the corner is left, and let me see if I can get you coming in a little better so you can see. I got just a little bit of my corner left here, and so it'll take 1 more piece of fabric for that. And then let's see, so then I need a dark piece for over here, because this is my dark side. I guess both of these are my dark side. So I'll need a piece here, a little piece here, and a little piece here, and then I can cut a rectangle out of this square. So I'll go add that and be right back. So I've got my, I was just looking at this, I've got my my log cabin potholder top extended now where I need to be, I think. And I've put my lid on here and kind of just taken a look at where I want to go. And you have to remember, actually two things. Remember that you want your potholder to be a little bit smaller than this lid so that it sits down in the carrier and sits on top of the lid when the project is all done. And another thing you want to remember, and this is really important, is on your fusible fleece, this is the same fusible fleece that I put this in when I did my embroidery and did my log cabin on top of this, on top of the fleece. But it is fusible, and I put the fusible side down, and you can't press it, so don't press these until we get our insul bright behind here. So don't press anything. You see, I just have mine kind of pinned down, and I did my log cabins approximately the same width as they were here, but it doesn't really matter if they're not exact, so don't worry about that. If they're not the same, it's okay. It's all going to be okay. So I've just kind of marked out corner to corner here, and I want my potholder to be a little smaller so that it fits in there, but I do want it to fit tight. So I measured, and the measurement that you're going to need to cut this is 10 1/4 by 8 1/4. And so what we're going to do next is we're going to put our insul bright behind here, and then we're going to press it, and then we're going to cut it out. That way everything is glued together and holding tight, and we can cut this out, and we're going to cut it at 10 1/4 by 8 1/4. This is my insul bright, and I'm just cutting a scrap that's bigger than what I need. And insul bright doesn't have a right or a wrong side, so whichever side that we lay it on will be just fine. So let's see. Let's put this down here, and we're going to go this way with it so that it fits on here, and then we're going to press it on here. But we're not going to press past it, because if you do, you'll glue your fleece to your ironing board. So we're just going to kind of press it on, then we're going to trim it up, and when we get it cut to size, we'll press it and finish fusing it to the back. So, okay, I got here, and I'm on, and I've got here and here, and I'm on. So yeah, looks good. All right, I'm going to just lightly press this down just here in the middle, and not press my fusible fleece to my ironing board. So I got my pressing done, and I've added about I'm guessing maybe 3/8 of an inch here on each end of the lid. This is how you'll know how to make your own pattern if you're making a casserole dish cover top for a different size dish than what we're using today. So then I'll have about 1/4 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch out on these sides. So let's see. This looks about, so we need 10 1/2, don't we? Or 10 1/4. Yeah, 10 1/4. So let's see here where we are at. So we need 10 1/4. So the middle would be 5 1/8. So I'm going to put 5 1/8 right at this point on my log cabin block. Kind of line this up so it's a little bit more square. And I'm going to draw a line across here. And then this way we need 8 1/4. So we'll go 8 1/4. Let's see. I think I'll do this side first. I'm going to change my mind. Isn't that the prerogative of a quilter? I'm going to do this side first because I need enough room here for the hanger, the little hanger that goes on the pot holder. So there's 8 1/4. So now, what is that? That's 3/8 inch. So I'm going to move this up 3/8 inch because that's where my little holder is going to go. And this is a friction pin, so it'll go away with the iron when we get ready to iron this. Okay, so now 8 1/4 down this way lands right here. Might have to add some more, another strip of my jelly roll. I guess we shall see. We still have to cut our corners, round our corners out. Okay, so I'm just going to line these two up, and then we're going to check and make sure we're square. And then we're going to cut out our corners. And don't worry that you're cutting off some of your embroidery. And I do want to tell you that if you don't have a hoop that is large enough to accommodate, this is the largest of the blocks that come in this design, but it comes in like 4 sizes. Just do the next smaller size, or whatever size fits in your block, in your hoop, and then add your jelly roll strips on out, and then center it. It'll work just fine. And if you don't have a machine that will do embroidery, don't worry about it. Do a log cabin block and do some utility stitching in it, or maybe even some decorative stitches. Something. Do something by hand if you want to. Oh, it'll be lovely. It doesn't have to be, you're the designer, you know, it doesn't have to be anything like this. So I'm going to cut this out now on those lines that I drew. And on this one side, I'm going to cut it out on the correct lines because I drew the line twice. You know, when you're making something like this, you're the designer, so you can change your mind and scoot out or scoot in or redo it. And the beauty of these markers, the friction markers that disappear with the heat of the iron, you can start completely over. Just go iron it, start over, and all your lines will be gone. Okay, there is the top to my casserole carrier. So now what I got to do is I got to round the corners. Let's look at the back. Oh, it looks great. Okay, got to round the corners, and I've got this nifty little ruler. All I got to do is find it. And of course, usually if I'm here by myself, I can put my eye right on it. And so it looks like this. Mine's old, so it's got some discoloration, but I like it a lot and it works great. But if you don't have a ruler like this, go get a glass or a cup or a sauce or something, however, so that it fits. Use your lid to figure out how big of a curve you need, so that you don't cut one too big or too small. But this little guy works so good, and I just cut around it, and the next thing you know, I've got my oval. I need to put a new blade in my cutter. This thing it's about dead. So now I'm just gonna round off all 4 corners now. And if I'm going through this too fast, or there was something I didn't put on camera that you wanted to see, just leave a comment or message me or email me or whatever you need to do to get in contact, and I will help you. Be glad to do it. So the next thing we're going to do here, I'm going to round this last corner off, and then we're going to make our little loop hanger for our potholder top, because we have to get that in there before we can put the binding on. So there is our potholder top. Now let's give it a try. Let's see how it fits. And we got to remember that we're going to have our binding around here. We're going to bind this, so it's going to have a binding on it. So let me get you up here where you can see what's going on. Oh, looky. It's going to be just right. It'll be just right. Yep. I like it. Looks great. There it is. All it needs is a binding and the loop. So let's make our little loop, and that is 2 by 5 inches. So pretty much all we need is a scrap. Let's make it green. 2 by 5 inches. Wait, yeah, we can do this. All right. So we've got 2.5 here on width, so we don't need that because we just need 2 inches. And we just need 5 inches, so let's come back to 5 inches. This end down here isn't very square, so I'll overcut it and then we'll square it up. Okay, so 2 by 5 and a little bit. Okay, let's turn it around and we'll square it up and make it 5 inches. And we're not going to put any interfacing on this. We're just going to make our little hanger, and the way we do it, let me bring you in so you can see a little better and bring you down. The way we're going to do this is, and you can take this to your iron and press it, but we're going to make a little mark down the middle so we can find the center, which is 1 inch. Then we're going to fold in to the center and press that. Fold into the center and press that. And then we'll fold the whole thing over one more time. And then we'll fold it like, we'll top stitch this. We're going to top stitch it. See how I did this one? I top stitched on both sides at 1/8 of an inch. There, I think you can see. And then we're going to put it right in the center top of our pot holder. So it'll go right here. And we're going to have it hang over a ways, because we got quite a bit of room here. And this is going to be the seam line at 3/8 inch or 1/4 inch or so, around there. So I'll let it hang over just a little bit. Let me see. I didn't put anything in my notes, but you can kind of gauge here about how long your loop's going to be. You don't want it to be too long or too short. So I will press and top stitch this, and then I'll be back, and I've got my binding over here someplace that I have been saving that matches. That's not it. Maybe I used it, but it doesn't matter if I did. So anyway, I'm going to use then some binding, and we're going to go all the way around this and stitch from the top, fold it to the back, and we're going to put our backing on here. We've got to put our backing on too, and that's going to be the same fabric that we used for the lining, so that everything matches. Here's our lining, and this is what I cut it out of. So now that we have this, we actually have an easy pattern for cutting out the pot holder lining. So we can do that. Here we go. We're just going to put this on here. And I'm going to rough cut it, and then when I get all my fabric out of the way so that I don't end up cutting something I'm not supposed to, I'll cut it to size. There we go. Alrighty, now we've got the backing on here, and let's see, why don't we pin that just for fun? And you can use your rotary cutter or your scissors. It'll be alright, no matter which way you want to do it. There. Alright, and I'm going to go in and I'm going to stitch down this line, down this line, down this line, and up this line in the ditch. I'm going to do it in the ditch. That's what I did on this one. And it just kind of looks cute on the back and holds it together, makes it look like a pot holder on the back. So we'll do a little stitching. And when we do that, we can actually, while we're at the machine, we can go ahead and baste our little loop. We can stitch the top stitching and baste the little loop on there. So let's cut this out, and we can do our quilting and do our little hanger. Then we'll put the binding on, and when that's done, we're all finished. So I would say you could do a little measuring on this top if you're doing a casserole cover that is a different size than the one I've given you the measurements for. And I've told you how to measure so that you can make your own pattern. You'll never have to buy one. And so if you're making a bigger one, then be sure to remember to leave yourself a seam allowance. 3/8, 1/4 inch, 3/8, something like that. One thing you can do is you could put your binding on at 1/4 inch, test it in the cover, and then if it fits nice and snug, that's great. If it's too big, you can come back and take take it on around to 3/8 inch. So, okay, well, I'm going to go do this stitching, and I'm going to stitch my hanger, and I'll be right back, and then we'll put on our binding. So, got this all done. Turn it right side up for you, and maybe I'll move you out just a little bit. So it's all finished. I did go ahead and baste all the way around this at 1/8 of an inch when I basted my loop on, because this seemed kind of floppity to me, and I didn't want it to be bothering me when I was putting my binding on. And I did my quilting on the back, just like I showed you what I did with the other potholder top. Not much quilting. You could do more if you want to. So now we're ready to put the binding on, and we're going to do that just like we did before. We're on the home stretch now. So we're going to put our binding on just like we did before. Just start anywhere. We're going to have to join it as we did before. So, you know, have your join maybe on a side where it's not so conspicuous. And these corners are a little bit sharper, so you'll need to stretch your binding just a little bit more. Remember when we were talking about putting the binding around the top of the bottom part of the carrier? I said you always kind of stretch it just a little bit. And so this one, on these corners, you'll have to stretch it just a little more, but it'll fit. See, you'll be able to get around there just fine with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I will go ahead and put my binding on, and I'm going to start at a 1/4 inch and then test it, and if I need to come in a little more, I can. And so I'll put my binding on, and you've already watched me do that on the bottom part of the casserole cover. So remember not to press a fold in this till you are all done, and then you can press it. Just let it roll. It's going to need to roll around to the back. So when we're done, our binding, we'll stitch it down to the back. And I like hand stitching, so I'll probably do mine by hand. But that's kind of what it's going to look like. I may trim a little just so that it fits beautifully, but it's going to look just fine. So I will go attach my binding and be right back. Okay, we're all done. I got my potholder lid finished, and I did my handwork on my binding, got that on and stitched that down. And let's test it out, see how it looks. We'll put the lid back on. And I want to tell you about these casserole dishes. I noticed that on Amazon they're $12 for this 11 cup Anchor Hocking rectangular baking dish. I just looked, and I got mine at the dollar store for $5.